Emsor Para 1000 advert Umbrella FM. And then influence on brand recall. Do they remember this brand? The brand we're talking about here is Emsor Para 1000. Do they recall the brand? Can they remember the brand based on the way they listen to the advert, or based on the fact that they listen to the advert? So this person's general objective says to investigate the influence of exposure to Emsor Para 1000 Umbrella FM advertisement on brand recall. So you see, it's almost a repeat of the title. So by now, it's easy for you to formulate general objective and then specific objectives. At least you now know the difference between general objective and specific objectives. Now, specifically, this study set out to do the following: to ascertain whether the respondents listening to Emsor Para 1000 advertisement on Umbrella 88.9 FM Onitsha. To ascertain how frequently the respondents listening to 88.9 FM Onitsha. Now, this second one is talking about listening to the station itself, not just the advert. To find out the extent Umbrella 88.9 FM advertisement on Emsor Para 1000 brand persuades respondents to buy the brand. To investigate whether exposure to Emsor Para 1000 Umbrella 88.9 FM advertisement leads to respondents' recall of the product. So here is what this person did. This person looked at the title and said, okay, since I want to investigate how listening to the advert influences recall, let me first ask question. Let me first formulate objective that will help me know how they listen to the advert. And he said to ascertain whether the respondents listen to advert, to ascertain how frequently they listen to the station. Somebody else can say to ascertain how frequently they listen to the advert. Now, here is what we're saying. You need to understand the nature of your title. You need to understand what your title, the title of your work, is saying before you can split the title into specific objectives. Now, general objective is easy to formulate, but the specific objective requires that you understand the variables in the title. When they say to investigate the influence of, when they say to investigate whether exposure to influences patronage of, or exposure to influences, first of all, ask questions on the first part of the title, exposure. How often do they watch? Why do they watch? What gratifications do they derive from listening to? Then you turn those questions. Of course, these questions that you ask will help you to formulate the objectives. Then you look at the second aspect, which talks about brand recall, or it talks about patronage. So look at the title, then attempt to split the title into different parts. You may say that the language this person used in this class example is not wonderful, maybe it's primary, but that's how to learn. You must use the most primary terms to learn. This is a 400 level student able to formulate 4 objectives from this title, and that's impressive. So you just ask questions concerning the work, concerning the title, to investigate whether exposure does this, to investigate whether they listen to the radio station. Once you keep splitting, keep making the mistake, the best way to learn how to write objectives of study is to write in the first place. Write, make mistakes. Probably if you're in final year, your supervisor can correct you, or you keep making the mistakes and then you end up correcting yourself. But you must try to be able to know how to do the right thing. So we noticed a common pattern in all the objectives of study that we looked at. So the objectives of study are always in futuristic terms. They show what you intend to achieve in the field. So you use to find out, to ascertain, to investigate, to evaluate, to analyze, among others. You use this to show that you are still going into the field. You've not done the work. You intend to go to the field. You intend to do the work based on these objectives. The objectives show specific aspects of the research topic you intend to study. That's why we kept saying that you use the objectives to split the research work. The title of the research work is repeated in the general objective of study, which is the umbrella objective in general term. But the specific objectives give you the step-by-step approach you're going to use to achieve your aim. So you can see that the objectives break down the topic into various subunits or sub-targets for study. The objectives point towards expected results. That is, either the final result confirms or contradicts them. So when you formulate objectives, it means it's giving you, the objectives give you direction on what you expect to see in the field. Probably when you now go to the field to study, you may end up finding out that what you are looking for is true or it's not true. So they are directional. Then the fact that they look like what you can achieve means that they are measurable. You see, initially I was saying that you have to formulate objectives that are researchable. Now the language is measurable. You formulate objectives that somebody can actually study. You don't formulate objectives that when you get to the field, they won't, make sense. So the objective has to be measurable. For instance, you can say to find out whether respondents listen to Brila FM. That's something that you can easily go to the field and ask question about and then measure. To find out whether exposure to Peak Milk advert on Billboard influences patronage. Of course, you can find out whether people who see Peak Milk Billboard, because of the advert they see on Billboard about Peak Milk, they buy. You can do that. But if you say to find out whether exposure to Peak Milk Billboard influences sale of Peak Milk in Nigeria, I mean, that may be difficult for you to measure. So it's not measurable. You can't even at this level. That is why we said that your objectives are specific and they are directional. It is something that you can easily measure when you get to the field. So you need to focus on your title, focus on the scope of study, focus on the respondents, people you want to study, and then channel the objectives towards achieving the goal based on these things I talked about. The respondents, the scope of study, the variables in the study, and all that. Finally, let's look at these quick facts about research objectives. Objectives are specific roadmaps. Objectives break down the research topic to measurable targets. Objectives are futuristic in nature. Objectives of study turn into research questions once they are converted to questions ending with question mark. Now that's for another study. It's easy to formulate research questions if actually you can formulate objectives. Just convert the objectives into question, it becomes a research question. Objectives of study should not be ambiguous. They shouldn't have two possible meanings. That's why we said for them to be measurable, they must not be ambiguous. That's why we said they have to be measurable. The easiest way to learn how to write objectives of study is to look at objectives of study written in similar research topics. If you're carrying out a project on advertising and you look for other project topics on advertising, if you look at the way they wrote their objectives, you can actually write your own objectives that way. Try and write the objectives using your own topic, using your own respondents, the way the other jobs you looked at wrote them. That's why we said it is better to look at existing jobs. If you can't write objectives at all, then look at existing jobs and try to write your own the way they wrote theirs. So when you look at other jobs, initially you might make mistakes, but because you have something you are looking at, that could make it easy for you to learn how to write objectives faster than expected. Research objectives identify the variables to be measured in your study. Research objectives describe the possible outcomes of your study. Research objectives save you time and money. You learn how to write research objectives by attempting to practically write research objectives. I said it before. The best way to learn how to write objectives of study is to write them yourself. Make the attempt. Even if you think you're getting it wrong, eventually you get it right. You can look for a job that has been done, similar jobs in your area, and then look at the way they wrote their own objectives. That way, try and write yours. You will see yourself improving. I hope that this quick lecture has helped you to understand the meaning of research objectives, how to write research objectives, difference between general objective and specific objectives of study, among others. But don't forget that the best way to learn how to write research objectives is to actually write research objectives, not listening to the lecture, not theory. You have to learn how to write by writing yourself. Attempt to write, make the initial mistakes, and then with time you will correct yourself and you see yourself writing general and specific objectives the right way. Thank you.